Okay, let's start with Men in Black. This is the pop culture version, and I think a lot of people in society weren't aware that Men in Black was a term of the art, as we say, in the ufological community. I think they probably thought it was a Hollywood manufactured item, but it was Hollywood borrowed from us again, just like in Close Encounters. You know, the description of the aliens came from UFO reports, not that people are dreaming of the aliens that were in Close Encounters because of the publicity. It's, you know, it's the cart before the horse. The media always gets it in reverse order. But anyway, this is the pop culture idea. And they were basically heroes, you know, trying to get the universe back on track from all these crazy aliens. And of course, the plot wasn't real strong. It's hard to know. But one of the themes I came across when I was looking for just Men in Black ideas, I found on the NIH website. I do work for a company called Constella Group, but we do mostly medical stuff. It's all NIH, CDC stuff. And I was really surprised on the NIH site they had posted in the kids area an educational site, and they just threw in the words to Men in Black. And I'm like, what does this have to do with? And it has to do with, purportedly, I don't know, environmental education. I have no idea, but it was just thrown in there as part of a program designed to teach children about the connections between their health and environment, encourage children to pursue careers in health. La la la, and then all of a sudden here's the Men in Black thing. I don't understand that, but the words are kind of interesting. This I guess was in the movie. I don't recall it being in the movie, but supposedly it was. The good guys dress in black, remember that, just in case we ever have to face and make contact. The title held by me, MIB, means what you think you saw, you did not see. Walk in shadow, move in silence, guard against extraterrestrial violence. But yo, we ain't on no government list. We straight don't exist. No names and no fingerprints. Saw something strange, watch your back, because you never know quite where the MIB's at. But anyway, that apparently is in the song, I don't know. It's on the NIH website, so. But in the movie, they were heroes, but I think most people that come in contact with a purported MIB do not feel good that they've met a hero. I think most people get a very mixed message and a very negative message. And so some people in this room might not be as familiar with the MIB phenomenon in general. So let me just give you a little background. I found another reference that was interesting. It was on this website called, you know, Carpe Diem sees the day. Well, Carpe Noctem sees the night, I guess. It's www.carpenoctem.tv, so the ending's a little unusual. But this guy goes on to say, in modern accounts, the MIB are usually connected in some way to UFO activity. The most common scenario has them appearing on the scene after a UFO encounter to intimidate witnesses with extremely peculiar and often threatening behavior. Dressed in ill-fitted or out-of-style black suits, the classic MIB tend to travel in twos or threes, but sometimes singly. Their modes of transport vary. They seem to prefer to cruise the paranormal back streets in black limousines, but they've also been known to pilot the occasional van, and in a few recent accounts have traded up to that all-purpose conspiracy vehicle, the black helicopter. Yet despite their outre mien, the MIB most often seem to buy American, usually vintage 50s Cadillacs that, eerily enough, often smell brand new. Witnesses who report MIB sightings describe foreign-looking men with exotic features, as if they're from elsewhere. They look Oriental or Indian. They're deeply tanned, although sometimes their complexion is extremely pale. The eyes of the MIB are usually described as slanted or bulging, as if from a thyroid condition. Their noses and chins are often pointed, and their cheekbones are set high in their faces. Though some are tall and thin with unnaturally long fingers, others are short or stout. They may or may not have fingernails. And stranger still is their reported behavior, and it goes on to talk about, you guessed it, in West Virginia, where they were offered some Jell-O, which he attempted to drink like a beverage. Another MIB is initially perplexed when shown the strange terrestrial implement we know as the ballpoint pen, but then runs off gleefully spastic when he absconds into the street with his prize. MIBs speak tortured English with outlandish accents. In some accounts, they don't move their lips when they communicate, suggesting a knack for telepathy. While in other encounters, you get it back. While in other encounters, they speak like machines. That comes up later, too, in a case that I encountered, that they speak like machines or very robotic. When it comes to the MIB, the subtext is always, we're not from around here. And this website goes on to talk about the book that introduced the concept of the MIB was a book with the great title, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, by Gray Barker. And you can read a lot about the history on that site with Bender coming in. And there's also some tribute to the Maury Island incident, which involved Kenneth Arnold, our UFO pioneer who saw the first arrangement of UFOs in 1947. I can't go into the Maury Island incident because it's a real trigger point. I've tried to do it before, and it's worthy of a whole hour. So I've decided to steer clear of Maury Island in this venue here. So ain't you glad? But it's very complicated. I recommend everybody to try to figure out what was going on there with the Maury Island, the men in black running around with Kenneth Arnold, and what what his role was, and a bunch of other people, Kenneth Dahl, and a whole host of unusual characters. Anyway, when Barker and Bender paired up, and Bender's initial enthusiasm for investigating flying saucers quickly chilled after he was paid a visit by 3 men in black suits. At first, Bender hinted that the men were government agents who had threatened him because I had stumbled upon something that I was not supposed to know. But later, Bender began to insinuate that the men might have had extraterrestrial origins. That was probably the beginning of that thought process that maybe they're not just G-men, maybe they're something else. Maybe they're aliens trying to pretend they're G-men, which when you think about it is completely bizarre. I mean, it's bad enough we have G-men running around trying to silence people. And aliens trying to silence people, but aliens trying to be G-men. It's very weird, because I would think the average person would be much more horrified if aliens are trying to silence them. That would probably be more effective. I don't know. But look into that Maury Island affair if you have the time, or the possibilities. Then there's the Keel era on Point Pleasant in those environs in West Virginia. And here's a little bit about that. After witnessing a UFO fly over her backyard, Mary Heyer, a newspaper reporter in Point Pleasant, had a succession of oddball visitors in thick-soled shoes. A large black car often followed her, peeling away when she noticed it, and once screeching to a halt and disgorging a man with a flash camera. At one point, 2 short men wearing black overcoats called on Heyer at the newspaper office. According to Heyer, they looked almost like twins. Dark complexions, oriental features, and one of them blurted out, "What would you do if someone did order you to stop writing about flying saucers?" Later that very same day, another small, Asian-looking man in black visited her office. He had abnormally long fingers and an unfamiliar accent. He used to introduce himself as Jack Brown, the UFO researcher, and then stuttered, what would you do if someone ordered you to stop printing UFO stories?" He denied knowing the other 2 men, but claimed to be a friend of Gray Barker. But anyway, this guy, Jack Brown, the short-statured man, visited several other Point Pleasant residents. And Mothman was being seen, UFOs were being seen, Keel's running around the landscape trying to get all the story straight. And a lot of interesting things went on, of course, culminating in the Silver Bridge disaster, which may or may not be related. Anyway, but a lot of stuff was going on. But I want to read one more little part of this that says, other UFO and Mothman witnesses received peculiar phone calls and either electronic noises that were on the other end or voices described as metallic or machine-like, often speaking in a foreign language. So that's the metallic, machine-like is another key word I want you to remember from that. So it's hard to define what a man in black is. I guess it's any strange encounter with a man who seemingly is dressed in ordinary business clothes, mostly dark, who may appear to be a government, G-man kind of guy, but also might have some other these really outre attributes as well. So I think we really do have intimidation by the government in some cases to silence witnesses, and I think in some cases it's just something else. I don't know what the something else is. It's obviously interdimensional. I don't know what's going on. Here's another reference I thought was interesting, and we'll go on to the next slide, amazingly. This was something else that I pulled up when I looked for Men in Black. This is a book called Men in Black, but this is a look at fashion through the last few hundred years. It's by this guy, John Harvey, at the University of Chicago Press, came out in '95. I just want to read one paragraph. Men's clothes went black in the 19th century. Dickens, Ruskin, and Baudelaire all asked why it was, in an age of supreme wealth and power, that men wanted to dress as if going to a funeral. The answer is in this history of the color black. Although in the 20th century, tastes have moved toward new colors, black has retained its authority as well as its association with strength and cruelty. I love that. At the same time, black is still smart and fashion keeps returning to black. So strength and cruelty, that's the symbolic roots of wearing black, I suppose. And keep that up there for a while here. I just want to read a little about the skeptics. I went around, I found this like about a year ago. It's called The Iron Skeptic, some kind of, maybe it's just on the web, publication. It comes out of Drexel University, Philadelphia. And this guy contends men in black meetings are fake. He's just a student author. He's senior majoring in material science and engineering. And it says, the paranormal, specifically the UFO phenomenon, is a subject that scientists must acknowledge as being of particular interest to their fields. The public, however, has a considerable interest in the subject, and if scientists do not debunk and demystify the bumper crop of hogwash related to the subject, they may find the line between science and fantasy irreparably blurred. Even these seemingly useless hoaxes, tricks, and mass hysterias can yield valuable data for scientists in the fields of psychology and sociology. Some things, such as lights in the sky, may also have a value to physicists, meteorologists, and other hard scientists. But one thing associated with UFOs that will never ever give up any hard evidence is the phenomenon of the so-called men in black. Then he says the story goes like this, blah, blah, blah. Someone sees something, and then they're silenced by these mysterious people that have these strange attributes. And the fact that the men in black act weird, but inconsistently weird, seems to me to be a major clue. The men in black that seem to be robots rarely do it in the same way. So his logic is, if these were really robots, they'd all act the same. So they're not really robots. I don't know about that. The basic line is, the phenomenon of men in black has two scientific values. Debunking cases will counteract the blending of science and New Age hocus pocus, and investigating claims will eventually expose derangements and psychoses sufficient to write 1,000 textbooks on abnormal psychology. So that's his whole take on it, that we're just looking at abnormal psychology pretty much in the UFO and all paranormal studies, but it's worth studying sociologically. But anyway, so, okay. I have to admit that I thought that Men in Black, when I started getting into the topic, was just an exaggerated kind of sideline, kind of maybe hysterical side of the UFO phenomenon. I guess I doubted that it could really be going on. Similarly, when I started getting into abductions, some of these stories are so outlandish, you just wonder, how could people be taken like this? And even though you're reading about it and you trust the author and you're friends with the author, you still, there's that little thin film between you and really believing it. But then when you start having abductees come to you personally, and they have the same nuances and the same stories, and they don't want to talk to anyone, they don't want to go on TV, and they don't want any attention, they just want to climb in a hole, but they wanted to talk to somebody. When you run into so many of these people, it really starts to add up. It really starts to get through to you. And the same thing with the Man in Black experience. I mean, I certainly didn't go around asking people that came to me about UFO experiences, hey, have a Man in Black experience? I mean, because I actually didn't think there was probably going to be much there. So once again, I'm reading. And pretty soon I stop reading, aren't you glad? But I want to read a couple of quotes from this. If you want to go to the next slide, this is just the cover of this book. This is a little paperback that I was lucky to find, Jenny Randall's book. And it's kind of dark, but I'm going to try to, okay, I got it. This is pretty short. Let's see if I can, it's kind of small print. Okay. I had long assumed that the legend of Man in Black was just part of American UFO mythology. Once you have been told worryingly similar stories from a growing band of seemingly reliable witnesses, however, you do have to reassess the situation. And I can mirror that sentence there. I discovered that most people had taken the view that there was no serious evidence to be investigated and so chose to pretend that the problem did not exist. I cannot have that luxury. The problem does exist, and I am finding more and more examples as my work continues. The patterns that link the cases together were becoming obvious. I had to delve into this difficult area and set out for the first time the full story of the Man in Black. And a little bit more I want to read. That they are part of the phenomenon itself, some sort of shape-changing alien manifestation, may well seem rather absurd to you. Frankly, it sits uncomfortably with me, although the UFO world is full of surprises, and I rule nothing out. This is an idea proposed by some researchers and has traces of tantalizing evidence to support it. Honesty dictates that I must take an impartial look. The other option, and the one that I suggest most readers will find easier to accept, is that the MIB are the product of a covert operation on the fringes of government. They're studying into UFOs. Even if this turns out to be the truth, it still poses huge questions. And that's true. If this is happening, what is it? And the oddball thing is, who are these people that work for the government that are being trained to act really strange, so they can't actually be accused of being a government operative because they're acting so weird? So that's food for thought there. One of the cases that she brings up in here is interesting. This is the Templeton case. And I just want to get to the Man in Black aspect of it, but in the Cumbria area of Britain, which I don't know offhand exactly what that looks like, but apparently there's a marshy area. And this guy was a long-term member of the fire brigade, as they call it, a fireman. And he'd been the official fireman for some 20 years, so he was a well-known photographer in the area. He went down to this marshy area with his wife and his 2 little girls. Decided to take one of the girls' pictures in a new dress, and she had her little frock on and had her pick some fresh flowers, and she posed. And he took some other pictures of the family. He took the pictures down to the pharmacist, which they say in Britain, the chemist. And the woman behind the counter said, "You've got some nice pictures this time. It looked like a beautiful day out there on the marsh, but too bad that man in the spacesuit ruined the picture." And he was like, "What?" He thought it was a weird joke. He didn't know what to think. But he brought him home, and then he discovered this next shot. This is the full shot, I believe. This is the full shot, which you may have seen this picture in your travels in the UFO world. The cool thing about the internet now is at least I can see it in color. I've always had to look at these grainy black and white pictures in books, but this is the picture, and the spaceman, so to speak, is really quite clear. If you want to go one more shot, it's a little zoom in on that. And the strange thing is, if you were to finish out the spaceman, his legs would not touch the ground. He's just kind of floating around. And you can see from that original shot especially, I mean, this is a marshland. There's no trees. There's nothing. I mean, there's nothing, no place for this guy to hide and sneak up on the picture. It's just like for miles and miles, it's extremely low area.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question.
Okay.
Do we know who took this picture?
Yes, his name is Jim Templeton. He took it on May 24th, 1964. That's a fact.
And do we know who this little girl is?
His daughter. She's 5 years old at the time.
And what is she now? What happened to her?
I don't know what happened to her. That's not, let's see, 64, so she was born in 59. Yeah. So she'd be my age, yeah. And she's probably still around. But the guy stayed as a fireman forever. You know, he didn't like run off or something. He was available for many, many years. In fact, Jenny Randles goes back to this case and starts looking into it again, and she didn't realize that it had she just wanted to get to the photograph. She didn't really care that, she didn't even know at the time that there was a Man in Black part of that story. Most people don't. When this story came out, I mean, the guy never mentioned the Man in Black part of it. But he had the film developed, and he was very concerned. He was like, we didn't see that guy, but who could that be? So he told the police, the local paper ran the photo. Pretty soon Kodak gets involved. And this is, 1964, so this guy had real emulsion and everything. And Kodak did a thorough research, and they said it's not a double exposure. It's really a thing in real space. We don't know how it got there. He claims he had not seen anything. Well, the picture in the local paper and some concern of local officials there, this area apparently is pretty strategically interesting. There's a power plant, this Blue Streak missile, not range, but it's a place where they put together Blue Streak missiles, the British government. And they were shipped down to Australia at Woomera, and that's where they were tested. So there weren't actually rockets going up here, but anyway, so this is kind of an interesting area. In this, within a couple miles, all the stuff is kind of forming a triangle around this little marshland where he decided to take his little stroll and take some pictures. But after the local paper printed the picture in the newspaper, and meanwhile Kodak's looking at it and so forth, that's when things got a little strange. Two men showed up at his house, the photographer's house, Jim Templeton, said, we want to ask you a couple questions. And they flashed some kind of identification, and he said, can I ask you where you're from? Can I see your identification again? They said, no, we're not telling you. We're with Her Majesty's government, is all they would say. And they didn't have names. One of them was 9 and one of them was 11. It was just like they call each other numbers. So anyway, they had this conversation, and they had a nice car, a nice Jaguar in this case, and he went with them, and they went to the site, and they were asking him all these questions in good faith. How are the animals acting? And he said, to be honest with you, all the sheep and the cows were all huddled together like there was going to be an electrical storm or something. They were acting a little strange, to be honest with you. And they asked him all these penetrating questions about everything. And it's sort of the good guy, bad guy. They get the whole story out of you, and then they say, you couldn't possibly have seen it. This guy, you must have seen him walking up. You made up the story. You made up the picture. You expect us to believe you. You know, that it's the usual pattern, as you will see, that goes on. And he was completely nonplussed by it. And they said, they basically said, we're getting out of here. We're not going with this. And they just started taking off towards the car. I mean, they really started taking off towards the car. And in fact, he couldn't catch up with them, and they just sped off. And he had to walk the equivalent of 5 miles home. And that's another thing that Men in Black have done before. They take people to the site of a sighting and they leave them there. That's actually happened in other cases. So it doesn't seem to be, I'm not sure what category you'd put that in. But the wife said, you know, they seemed very strange. There wasn't something wasn't quite right with them, et cetera, et cetera. It turned out that actually the British government had a lot of interest in this account because this is really bizarre. But at the same time that he was photographing this, remember, the rockets do not get tested there. They just get built there and they're shipped to Australia. At the Woomera Range, where they were testing these Blue Streak missiles, they were about to do a test, and all of a sudden on the launch pad, in the TV cameras, the monitors, they had 2 men in suits like that walking around. And they had to scratch the launch, and everybody went crazy. How these guys get out here? Who are they? And of course the search was on and they couldn't find them. So that's why the government was very interested. And all kinds of bizarre theories were able to be found that they had at least speculated on. Some kind of weird time-place distortion where these spacemen were messing around with the missiles at the launch site and also where they were built. Who knows? But that was why the U.S. government, I mean, not the U.S. government, probably the U.S. government, but MOD was definitely involved, and there's a lot of evidence. Jenny Reynolds was able to scare up a lot of memos and at least reference to it, and that seems to be a continuing interest. As an update, this area of the marsh is called the Solway Firth. So it's also sometimes called the Solway Spaceman, and it was the Solway Spaceman incident of 1964. And the whole area of Cumbria had some kind of Fred festival. Don't ask me what Fred stands for, but that's an acronym for something. And that was, they were trying to, this was in 2004, so they were trying to reenact the famous photograph 40 years later, and they had an advertisement out looking for photographers that wanted to reenact the picture. I don't know how you reenact a paranormal picture, but I'm sure something could have been staged. I don't know how that turned out. So that's the Templeton case. Still a mystery to this day, I suppose. Okay, now we'll move on to Rex Heflin, which is another case. The images you're going to be very familiar with. This was the story about the rocket Clued Spaceman and the tie-in with the Woomera test range. But anyway, yeah, go on to the next slide there. Oh, we lost one. Yeah, if you want to go back.
And the government search didn't get anywhere in that particular case.
Yeah, well, she was able to get some documents that they had discussed the possibility of why this terrible coincidence, the very same time they were able to track down these 2 men that looked similar, showed up. But that was as far as it went. But Kodak said that the pictures were legit. There was something strange. You know, I mean, they took it very seriously, the whole incident very seriously. And another odd thing, he went back there just to take pictures of the marsh without his kids, just to document the pictures of where he was. And I guess just speculating about how did that happen. And he went and took the pictures to the local drugstore or chemist, as they call it. And we went to pick him up. He had a roll of his house and this and that, and it was missing. Like all the pictures were missing. And once again, he reported that to the police, and the police said, we can do nothing. MOD took them. You know, you better stop taking pictures down there. So that was how that was. Anyway, but moving on to this Rex Heflin case. This guy Heflin, I'm sure you're familiar with this, so I'm not going to dwell on the case too much. He took 4 pictures. This is evocative of them, but he took 4 from his truck. He was a highway traffic inspector, and his job, as I understand it, was to take his Polaroid camera and document where trees had grown over signs or damaged signs or vandalism, things that need to be repaired on the highway, and that was his job. So he's driving around wanting to document highway problems, and he sees this UFO coursing about. He took 4 photos, like I said, with his Polaroid. The photos have checked out very well. They did at the time, though, once again, there's a couple camps. Some people didn't like this cloud or that cloud or whatever, but basically they checked out in the past and in modern times, which I'll bring up to date. But the Marines from the local El Toro base approached him to study the photos. And they had them for 3 or 4 days, and they returned them promptly and said, we don't know what's going on, but we're not responsible for this aerial device. Immediately, the same day after he got the photos back, 2 NORAD representatives came and requested the photos, and that was on September 22nd, 1965. He took these pictures August 3rd, 1965, so quickly the Marines had them and brought them back. September 22nd, NORAD comes by looking for him. The other people brought them back in 3 days, what the heck, gave it to him. Well, they never were returned, or at least, never say never, but they were not returned for many decades, put it that way. In 1967, 2 years later, 2 men came by questioning about the photos again. He said he didn't even have the photos. As a matter of fact, I'm mad that NORAD's had them for 2 years. But he noticed he had interference on a stereo, and one of the men came to the door, but the other man was left in the car, and the car had an eerie ultraviolet kind of a glow, like a purplish glow. But this visit made him mad because it brought to mind the fact that, NORAD's had my pictures for 2 years. So he called up NORAD and tried to go through channels and called the Air Force and tried to figure out. He goes, no, those guys told me they were with NORAD. They showed me IDs that said NORAD. But everyone denied having the photos or having anything to do with it. And this led to this memo being written, which Bruce is going to bring up next, which I don't have a copy of it here. So I'll see if I can. It just says information not verifiable has been reached to our office that a person claiming to represent the Air Force or other defense establishments, have been visiting people that have cited unidentified flying objects. In one report, they claimed they were from NORAD. But this memo came out to try to put an end to this. This is from the Department of the Air Force, but this isn't a very good resolution. I realize you can't really read it, but this is an Air Force. It was saying they're impersonators, and this is against the law, and we want to crack down on these people. And this was not an isolated case. The next slide, if you want to go to that, this is Flying Saucer Review of 1967, and titled "The Silencers at Work." But it's really great. This article is really good because it does mention, the root data on this. So you could, if you really, wanted to come up with another hobby, you could try to look these up. Like it states on February 5th, 1967, the Sunday Telegraph. Remember, this comes from Britain. FSR does. Anyway, the Sunday Telegraph published a disquieting story from the United States. In it, a Pentagon spokesman has stated, and taken from the Florida Orlando Sentinel of February 3rd, of an account which appeared in more than 100 newspapers in the United States. And here's a quote from the article, which is a quote from the Pentagon spokesman back in those days. Mysterious men dressed in Air Force uniforms or bearing impressive credentials from government agencies have been silencing UFO witnesses, according to Colonel George P. Freeman, Pentagon spokesman for the Project Bluebird. We have checked a number of these cases, Freeman said in an interview this week, and these men are not connected with the Air Force in any way. He cited one recent case in which police officers and other witnesses at the UFO sightings in Wanaka, New Jersey, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Is that right? Wanaka? Okay. The reservoir case, Wanaka, where I've never known how to pronounce that, were allegedly collected together by a man wearing an Air Force uniform. They were told that they hadn't seen anything and that they shouldn't discuss the incident. We checked with the local Air Force base and discovered that no one connected with the Air Force base had visited Wanaka on the date in question. So there's a bunch of other references to some sightings and some specifics about where the articles came from. So this was not just an isolated case. There was like a spate of this activity definitely going on. Okay. The next case I want to talk about, I don't have a visual for, so we'll keep that slide on. But this is from this book. And the reason I bring this case up is this is a case that Jenny Randles has in her files. The Templeton case, really, that angle, she discovered herself because she was just going back over the photograph itself and wondering about that. And then she didn't even know it had this Man in Black aspect. And another case that Jenny Reynolds talks about, and it was just a case that it did get in the papers, but it wasn't really written about extensively in any books or anything, this case. But this is January 23rd, 1976. It was approximately 5:20 p.m. This young girl, Shirley, a 17-year-old office worker in the Lancashire area of Britain, she gets off work at 5, gets the bus, and it's about 5:20, and she has about a 10-minute walk to go home. So she was walking home from a bus stop. She saw lights over the nearby reservoir. They appeared to be red and amber. Then soon the whole thing was on top of her. And they said it looked like an upturned pudding basin. And what that description meant was it was curved on the bottom and flat on the top. And there were red lights on it, and the amber glow seemed to come from windows. But suddenly this thing was literally on top of her. And it had been kind of, I mean, this was January. They said there was going to be cold rain or even snow that day, so she had an umbrella. So she tried to defend herself with her umbrella, of all things. So she had the umbrella out, and this thing was getting closer and closer. She was actually trying to push the UFO away with an umbrella, and there was a very impressive pressure coming down, and her teeth started hurting. And she doesn't remember anything after that. At some point, she regains consciousness and stumbles home and points to the sky and tells her parents, you know, horrible thing. And her parents called the police because they thought that she'd been raped, because she could barely speak and she kept saying attack and that kind of thing. So the police come to the house, and it was a female police officer who took the investigation, took the story, didn't seem to get too excited, but at this point the girl's saying, no, it was a UFO, it was one of those space things, and it just came after me, it was hideous, it had these lights. Other lights were reported by other people. So the newspaper blotter was picked up by the newspapers. What happened last night? Well, we had a burglary, and oh, we had a UFO sighting, and the girl got attacked by a UFO. Oh, and they ran away with the story. So then there were some UFO investigators calling on her. She did cooperate with one, but she was very private. I mean, she was only 17. Her parents were very protective of her. And other people wanted to talk to her in media, and they wanted to put her on TV, and she said, no way. You know, I talked to one UFO investigator, and you guys have the police blotter story to go on, that is it. And she lost some work because she really didn't feel well at all. She felt very ill. Her teeth were really messed up. Her fillings on her top of her teeth were like rattled out and had to be redone. But the fillings on the bottom were really bad because they had sort of rattled down into her gums, and it was a real mess. And she had to have extensive dental surgery to sort it out. She also had a rash up here, like where she was more directly associated with the UFO, and she also found she had burns on her legs, just different marks all over her body. And of course, the time frame, you know, if you really added up, she had, I think, about 30 to 40 minutes of missing time by the time she stumbled home. Anyway, but in the by and by, that was on January 23rd, 1976. On February 2nd, not too much longer, the mother received a call from a man who investigates these things, asking about the girl's health specifically and marks on her body specifically. The mother cut short the call. How did he know about the marks on the body? She refuses to talk to anybody about that. She's very upset about that. And Shirley never discussed physical effects with anyone. And where did this guy get the phone number? You know, the whole story. Her mouth was sore, she had burns, nausea, and a purple rash. On February 3rd, the next day, she had a visit from 2 MIBs that come to the house. At 7 p.m., the black suits came in. One was tall and blonde and talkative, and one was short. And that's another theme, the tall and the short one. And let me see the time here. Ugh, this is bad. Anyway. I got some good stuff coming up, too. Okay, we'll see. We'll see what I can do. Maybe I can go till 10 after. Okay. It's really good stuff, especially when I get to the audio. You want to hear the audio stuff. Okay. Anyway, the mother received a call, and then the men were not put off. They came, and they basically said at the front door, "If she doesn't cooperate with us now, we'll make her cooperate." And it was so definitive that they decided to let him in. And the girl came down the staircase, told him the whole story, and it's the same old story. They seemed to be very cooperative and nice and wanted to hear everything at first, but then later they started picking her story apart and accusing her of making things up, and it's a pattern that's well established. But the odd thing was, one did all the talking, which is not odd. The other one sat very far away, like 25 feet away, and had a little black box. And he just sat on his lap, and he said that it's a very sophisticated recording device. But yet, it had no moving parts. We're talking 1976, it's only this big. The guy never seemed to change tapes or do anything with it. It just sat there, a featureless black box. Very odd. The main guy called himself the commander, and he said he was with the RAF. But it turns out that title is not appropriate for the RAF. There is no such title. You can be a wing commander, you can be other things, but no one would ever walk around going, I'm a commander. They said that's inappropriate, terminology there, nomenclature or whatever. The quiet man sat on the other side of the room with the featureless black box in his lap, hardly said a word. And then the questions got a little stranger, like, did you see anyone inside? Did you see any moving parts? Did you see any instruments? And he also said, they also started saying, can you read minds? Do you levitate? All these kind of things. So it got kind of strange. Well, it was a horrible, harrowing night, and the guy didn't leave till 10, so it was a 3-hour grueling session. And later I'll come back to the comparison with another case that I'll quickly play. But many years later, when she was 26 years old, she contacted Jenny Randles, and that's how we got the MIB part of the story, which had never been recorded before. She said, when I was 17, I was scared of my shadow. It was a horrible thing. I had a lot of physical problems. But now that I'm 26, I want to get the whole story out there. So she told Jenny Randles. And Jenny Randles says, I think you should be regressed because there's missing time there. So she did get regressed, and it was pretty much a typical, whatever you want to call it, typical abduction. She was taken aboard, and she was on a metal slab, and they were doing things to her. And these were like the tall Nordic types, which is common in Britain and all over Europe and somewhat here too. I have many abductees that see the tall, blonde figures. So she did have these marks on her body and these things that happened to her on board the ship, so it kind of makes sense. But then they tried to regress her. They said, it's really good to get more detail about the MIB because that is really fascinating. These 2 men that came to your house, what the heck's going on there? When they tried to regress her for that, she became so hysterical, and she said she was being interrogated verbally, but also in her mind, like somebody was penetrating her mind and going all over the place. She said it was just so horrible. Even though she was only 26 years old, the doctor present said, we got to take her off. Her vital signs are going through the roof. So they weren't able to get anywhere with that. But other oddball things happened to her. She got a call stating that she should stop the regressions and meet with the caller to find the real truth. Of course, she declined to meet with the caller. Another call came through saying that she was all signed up for a very plush government job, but she'd have to move to Zimbabwe immediately, and you have to meet us at this hotel so we can arrange your transport. You applied for this job, and you're going to get this plush job. Of course, she didn't go meet the people. Who knows what that was about? But there's kind of weird things happen to people that are abductees or purported abductees, believe me. I'm going to move on to, these are 2 cases that I interviewed the people. And this one, this guy Don, no one's really heard about him. I'll just use his first name because he really wasn't afraid of putting his name out there. And he lives about 10 minutes from Washington, near Fort Belvoir. And he had a sighting on September 10th, 1999 at 7:50 p.m. It was in September, so it was kind of a dark dusk out, not completely dark yet. He was outside on the step. His wife was inside cooking. And at first he saw a distant large black bird. He said it kind of had angles on it. And I said, wow, that's a big black crow. Man, that's bigger than a crow. And then he realized it had angles on it, something weird going on as it unfolded. But then he realized that's no crow. This is like a big aerial thing. I don't know what. And it started kind of unfolding in some way. Anyway, it came right towards him. At some point, it seemed like it was mushroom-shaped with the mushroom head at the bottom. And then it had a very bright light, and it sort of opened out underneath, and suddenly he was looking directly up at this thing that had 6 sections, like a pie wedge. And I do have some shots of his drawings. This is just his first view. He said it had like a haze over it, and it looked kind of like a bird, just the general idea of bird with flapping wings. And then let's see if we can get these other views. Some of them didn't work out for some reason. But there's the overhead view, and this thing totally opens up, okay? And he sees this black haze around it. These dark spots here are a little misleading because they're actually not dark. Those were extremely bright lights. And he looks up at this thing, and these extremely bright lights are cascading down, and he feels heat, and he's just totally freaked out. Probably because he has some kind of history with this subject. This totally flipped him out. He ran in and said, they're after me, we got to get out of here, we got to go. So they immediately packed their bags in 5 minutes and they went out to the Shenandoah, due west, and went to this little, I don't know if it's a bed and breakfast or a little inn or something that has like log houses or something. He feels comfortable out there and he felt like he had to get out of town. So that's what he ended up doing. That was his way of coping. In the morning, of course, he didn't bring something to change in. I mean, they brought the bare essentials. He was wearing a dark T-shirt, like I don't know if it was navy blue or maroon, but it was dark. So if you know things about light and energy, that would actually concentrate the energy. So when he took his shirt off in the morning, he discovered that he was burned from here down, like right where the light hit him, underneath the shirt. And ironically, he wasn't burned on his exposed arm, but just where the T-shirt was. And it bothered him for quite some time. About a week after that sighting, he first worked with Joan Woodward, who used to be an old NICAPper, and she's also a MUFON member, and she took his prosaic story about this sighting. And he also went into some of the other experiences that he had had with her. And then I got into the picture, and I didn't even know Joan had worked with him. It just came to me, can you go talk to this guy? And I guess she was kind of bypassed. I can't remember. I know she decided, I've had enough of him. I think it was making her uncomfortable, like these other things that were going on with the guy. Anyway, he says, I guess that's about it for that part, referring to the actual sighting. Now comes the part that's kind of embarrassing, but I'll say it anyway. Afterwards, and later he says, it's about a week later, we had some things happen here. I don't know quite where to start. I already told you about we had batteries failing around the house. But I don't necessarily consider that part of that. I'm not sure. But I was laying in bed. I went to bed, and my wife woke up the next morning, and she had a very puzzled look on her face. And his wife is a very serious person. She's like a major buyer for a major chain, and I'm sure makes good money and is really a very serious person. But she woke up with a puzzled look on her face. She told me that a man had come in to visit, and she said, in the middle of the night, she went down to check on, for some reason, she went down in the middle of the night, down to the basement to go out the back to check on the dog that lives in the doghouse in their backyard. And she went down the basement, and there was a man downstairs. And he kept asking where I was at. And, and he's speaking from himself. Don says, I looked at my wife's face, and I was very troubled. I've been married to her for 10 years, and I never heard her say anything like that. Then I asked her why she was so troubled about it, and she said because she could describe the man perfectly. It was not a dream. She could draw a picture of him in detail. She doesn't think it was a dream. And this man kept repeating to her that he wanted to know where I was at. So I tried to ask her the man's description. No, I didn't try to ask her the man's description because she seemed so troubled about it. We just dropped the subject because my wife seemed very, very rattled and frightened by this thing. She did not think it was a bad dream. And then as he goes in the restroom and starts cleaning up for the day, he starts having flashbacks. And he realized there was something very scary standing beside his bed. I didn't know what to call it, but his experiences of the night before seemed very disquieting. Something frightened him so bad, he felt like an animal frightened and backed into a corner. And he remembers having that feeling, but he doesn't remember too much else. But he said that happened the same night my wife was saying there was a man looking for me in the basement, demanding where I was at. But anyway, so that's a weird thing. But then he has the big experience. And this was actually quite a bit afterwards. He had an interview with Joan where that information was given on December 10th, 2000. He had the sighting 3 months earlier. In September 10th, 1999, October, at 7:50 p.m. He gave the report to Joan, and then he had a visitation of two men in a very weird way. Let me set this up very briefly, and then I'm going to throw the audio on. He comes home from work Friday. He may not have been working, he might have come from somewhere else, so it's a small detail, but he comes in early dinner time. And basically says to his wife, hey, what's shaking for dinner? And she's cooking. And she says, get out of my way. I have that brunch for 10 to prepare for. I'm starting to cook stuff now, and I'm just going to eat as I cook, and you're on your own tonight. And he's like, well, that's a fine howdy-do. And he's kind of miffed. So he stomps around and gets his keys and gets in his truck and revs it up, and then he's going to go somewhere with the guys or whatever. But then he realizes he doesn't know where to go. What am I doing? And so he just drives across the street. He said he normally would not have driven across the street, but he was already revved up, so he drove across the street. And there's this place called Damon's, which is kind of a chain, and you've probably seen one around. I've seen them in Pennsylvania and everywhere. It's just kind of a microwave sports bar kind of place. So it's Friday night at Damon's. It's kind of crowded. There's a lot of people from Fort Belvoir. He sees there's no seats hardly anywhere. And so he goes up to these two men and says, can I use your seat? I'll pull up to the bar. And they said, no, we're expecting someone. Maybe later you can have our seat. And he's like, maybe later I can have your seat. How weird that is. I'll find another seat, you know. So he finds his way to the bar and orders his food and goes there. And then the men approach him. So I just want to throw the tape on. It's only 4 minutes long, so don't think you're going to be trapped here forever. It's 4 minutes long, and I do have another audio thing that I'd like to play, but we'll see what we can do here. It's
Well, you all queued up on us?
yeah. I don't know how loud it's going to be because we don't have external speakers working.
I'll go into as much detail as I can with this. See, my wife was home that night, and this was a part I left out because it's a little bit personal, but I'll tell you anyway. And don't get me wrong, my wife and I have had a very good marriage, but in marriages, we've had a few disagreements. I mean, in 11 years, we could count all of our disagreements on my two hands here, maybe 8 or 9 disagreements. Nothing disrespectful to each other. We have a disagreement, we always respect each other, and we just, you know, let it go at that. But she was home that night, and I don't even know what the disagreement was about. So I left to cool off, and I went across the street here to Damon's restaurant across the street. I was going to get something to eat. And I walked in there, and I turned around and looked, and these two gentlemen were looking over at me, and I seen they had extra chairs, and I didn't have a chair to get at the bar to order dinner, so I went over and asked them for a chair, and they were very polite. They said that I could have one if their company didn't show up. So I just went and got me another chair, and I sat down, and I was eating, and I guess pretty close to the end of my meal, and one gentleman came over to me, the heavy-set man came over to me, and he asked me if he would like to talk with me about my sightings that I had. So I thought that was strange, but then I thought maybe that Joan, she reported my sighting to the military base. So I thought maybe they followed me there, I don't know. So it was funny, they left that table and they went to one of the round tables behind the bar. These circular round tables, they sat down there. And then I told them when I finished eating, I'd come by and talk to them. So I just finished up real quick what I had. I walked over to their table, and they would seem very polite at first, which made me feel easier. They seemed, they seemed real polite, and they asked me about my story. Well, I told my story to them, and instantly they turned. They went, they said I was a liar. They said that it wasn't true. I told the man where I lived, and he said that he didn't even believe that. He said I was lying about that. And then he looked at my hands, and he said, your nails are real short. He said, do you bite your fingernails? And I said, no, I work with lumber, and my hands are calloused, and my fingernails break. I work with heavy tools. And they both just started getting real disgusted. I mean, they just gave me very negative input, and just made me feel really uneasy. And I'm sitting there thinking, what am I standing here for? And then he asked for my driver's. There was a thin man and a heavy-set man. Well, the thin man didn't talk at all at first. The heavy-set man proceeded to ask me for my driver's license, and I told him, no, I won't show that. And he got up and he stood up, said, well, we'll arrest you. He said, it's against the law to file a false report with the military. And I said, well, I'm not going to show you my driver's license. And so the thin man just made a remark. He showed me his military ID, and I just glanced at it because I wasn't interested in, after that point, I wasn't interested in seeing who he was or what. He just said he was a military investigator. And then I told him no again, I wouldn't show my driver's license. And the one man left. Well, a couple of times he left and came back. I thought he was going to the bathroom, but he left twice abruptly, real quick, and he came back. And when he came back again, he asked me for my driver's license again, and I said, no, I won't show them to you. And he got up again and says, well, we'll just put you under arrest and take you in. And at that point, he left again. And then when he left again, the thin man said to me, he wouldn't look me in the eyes, he just looked straight ahead. And he just said to me, I don't want you telling this story to anybody, and I don't want you talking about this anymore. He said, it's in your, something like it's in your best interest, or that would be the best thing for you to do. And then I left. I just took off and got out of there. And I think the thing that frustrated me the worst about this, it went over in my mind again and again and again. I said, why did I stand there like some puppet and take that from them? I could have called the police and, you know, just blew them off right there and put them in their places. But here I was so overwhelmed by the way they were treating me, I was just defending myself. You know, I just drew a line all of a sudden, and I said, at least I'm not going to show them my driver's license. I'm going to draw the line right here and now. And I think it was, to me, it was more like a brainwashing where they spoke to you nice 1 second, and then the next minute they were degrading you. They either calling you a liar or, you know, it was very strange the way they acted. So I just got up and left there, and I came home and I told my wife about it. And I called my mother and told her about it, and she asked me if I was going to report it. And I said, well, it's so bizarre, I don't know if I will or not. And
okay, you can end it there. It did take him a couple months to get his courage up to report that part of the event. But I want to, Rob, if you can turn this off, because I'm done with the slides. I thought, you know, if you want.
Switch on the back.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out where it was, but I wasn't doing too well. I just thought.
On the other side, there's a power switch.
Okay. Hopefully it doesn't need to. And we can turn the lights on if you want. Because I just want to be able to read my notes without opening the window. You know, that is always a bit odd. I can't read my own handwriting here. Okay. I just want to draw the parallels between this case that Jenny Randles had with the girl that nobody knew about, that only she wrote about in this book that wasn't really distributed in this country, and this case that nobody knows about, that I've spoken about a few times, but it hasn't been written about. First, there's the paranormal beginning of the event. In the case of the girl, it's like, how did these people know who to call, and that she'd had physical injuries, and they just show up at her door? I don't think any of those details certainly weren't in the article in the paper. You know, in this case, the guy, he goes to the restaurant on the spur of the moment because his wife sends him out. I mean, and they were already there. I mean, it makes no sense at all. But they were already there, and they had these military trappings. They called themselves military investigators in the case of my case with Don. In the case of the woman, they said they were military and they were commanders, which made no sense. And in both cases, they were polite, they listened to the story, and then they turned on the witness and just came up with all kinds of crazy explanations. Like in the case of the girl, it was just a weather balloon, wasn't it? And all kinds of crazy gyrations go on and are very rude to the point of aggression to the people. And the one that did all the talking was tall, and the shorter man was quiet. Same exact MO, if you want to call it. And another odd detail is they sat at a table with water in the case of Don, and they never even touched their water. I mean, here it was, this big bar scene on a Friday night, and the place is jammed, and these guys just have one glass of water between the two of them and don't even drink the water. And then here's some quotes that were interesting. Don says, the father of the girl said, you know, I have never been able to understand why I did not throw them out, why I let them hound Shirley, our daughter, for hour after hour. I would normally not tolerate something like this. Why did I let them do this thing? And my friend Don says, why did I stand there like a puppet and take that? It was like brainwashing. And then even the tagline that they used at the end of the Shirley incident, Shirley's not a real name, by the way. Don is his real name, but you must not talk about this matter. It is in your best interest not to do so. And Don was told, it's in your best interest not to tell this story. So it seems to be, whoever's training these people, it's the same script. I have one more audio thing to do, and I really think it's worth doing because Apparently, he sent this to Linda Howe, and she got it on a radio show or something. But aside from that, I don't think anybody's really talked to this guy at length like I did. I spoke about this topic of Men in Black up at Pat Marcatilio's conference, and then this guy came up to me, and his name is Gary Sudbrink, and you can't get around his real name because that's all over the audio clip I'm going to play. But to set this up is kind of complex. I'll be really as quick as humanly possible. This was pre-9/11, okay? So when we talk about the airport, we're talking about security that was pretty lax back then. So that's the first thing I want to say. He was active duty military in a military uniform, but he was a military pharmacist, and I believe he was about 30 years old at the time. And I think this would be going back about 8 years now. That would be my estimate. I'd have to look, because I didn't get a firm date. And I couldn't find my notes on this case, but believe me, I remember it. And really, the audio part kind of speaks for itself. He's a guy about 30 years old, like I said, a pharmacist, active duty with the military. And he was stationed in Texas, but his parents live in Brooklyn. And he suddenly gets a 3-day pass to go home, and he doesn't even tell his parents. He's able to slip on a flight, you know how they do. And you know, he's like, this is great. You know, he took a commercial flight, but he was able to make the flight. And he said, I didn't tell my best friend, I didn't tell my parents, I was just going to pop in for a 3-day weekend. So he's in the airport. He was wearing his uniform, but it was winter time, and he had like a V-neck sweater that was also official issue military sweater over it. It's such that part of his name tag showed. Okay. Well, this guy comes to the airport and starts talking him up as he's waiting for the gate to open, and starts blah blah blah, small talk. But all of a sudden, the small talk gets more steered and more focused, and the guy either brings out, I think he brings out, you know, some kind of clipboard, and he says, "Now, what is your name? Because I can't see your full name." And he's like, "Well, what's it to you?" And he's like, "Well, I might want to send you something, you know, because there's always opportunities." And he got the impression the guy was into home business or something, wanted to, I don't know. But he just kept saying, "Well, I really need your full name. And you said you lived in the such and such apartments. Those are pretty nice. Now, what would be your exact address?" And all of a sudden he was like, "This is too weird," you know. He's like, "Look, buddy, you know, that's okay. I really don't want to get into home business. I'm already gainfully employed. Got to run." And he goes in the plane. So he thinks he's safe. He sits in the plane. And but then this guy comes up and sits beside him and says, "Hey, how you doing? You know, what's your name again? I can't read your name tag." And yeah, I understand. You know, you live in Texas, and you know, you live. You know, you're heading back home. Where are you going? You know, Brooklyn. All this stuff comes out, and it's like the same thing, but this is a different guy. You know, and this guy must have a ticket because he's on the plane, and he's going, "I can't believe this is happening. Deja vu all over again." And he's very suspicious. Finally, the stewardess comes by and says, "Sir, you're not in the right seat. You have to move along. This woman wants to claim her seat." So he's moved along. But the guy doesn't give up. He goes behind him, and he's like kneeling over the seat going, "Yo, you know, another thing, let me get that name, you know." And he's just like, "Look, buddy, you know, I'm not interested in home business. Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying." You know, finally the stewardess comes by and goes, "You're going to have to move along. You know, you're 8 rows back or whatever." So he gets moved along. So already he's very freaked out because two men are in cahoots in this wacky thing, and he doesn't know what's going on. As soon as he gets to the airport on the other side, he immediately calls up his landlord, which I would never have the phone number, but he calls up the landlord and says, "You know, I think some guys are casing my apartment because they know I'm out of town, and I don't know what's going on, but can you make sure my apartment stays safe?" Well, his apartment does stay safe, so don't worry about that. But anyway, he shows up in Brooklyn and goes home and says hi to the folks, and then he calls up his best friend and says, "Hey, Mikey, whatever, what's going on, man? I'm in town." He goes, "Yeah, I know, you just called me." He's like, "What do you mean I just called you?" He goes, "I just hung up 10 minutes ago with you." "Yeah, you're in town. Okay, we'll get together." And he's like, "No, I never called you. What are you talking about? I haven't talked to you in a month." He's like, "No, man, you just called. We talked for a little while. You sound a little out of sorts. You have a cold, but that's okay. We can still go out, right?" He's like, "But I didn't call you. I didn't call you." And he's like, "Look, man, you called me. Well, are you playing a game here?" And he goes, "No, I did not call you." Well, you know, at this point, he's really freaked out by all these unrelated, semi-related things. And his background was such that his father and his uncle had some UFO sightings. And for all I know, they may be abductees. I don't know. He's kind of close-lipped about what the whole family thing is. But I said to him, I said, "Have you ever seen a UFO?" You've never seen such a pregnant pause. I mean, usually people know if they've seen a UFO, but he seems unclear whether he's seen a UFO. He said, "Mostly, I just have weird things happening to me that don't fit in categories." I said, "Can you give me one example? Just give me one." And he really didn't want to talk about it. But he told me that, he goes, where I used to live in this other apartment, there was a little duck pond in the back, and every morning I had to leave at 6 a.m., but I'd go in the duck pond with a handful of bread. It was just a dumb thing, and I would just throw a handful of bread to the ducks every morning. That was my little routine to get myself psyched for the day. And one time I went out there and I threw a piece of bread, and it hovered in the air, and just hovered for the long, and that was it. I never threw any more to the ducks after that. But he said weird things like that were always happening to him. And I think in his mind he was kind of tying it to that fact the family was involved in UFOs. Well, anyway, he's really perplexed that his friend is saying that he just called him up, but he didn't sound like himself. He doesn't know what the hell's going on. He's kind of freaked out. Well, the phone starts ringing, and there's a series of phone calls. I believe it was just, it was 2 nights. The first night some phone calls came through, and after the first phone call, he started recording the phone calls. And it's hard to hear, but let me just say this. At some point, his father gets on the phone. At some point, his uncle gets on the phone. At some point, his mother gets on the phone. So if you're confused, we're all confused. But because I don't have I don't have a list of what's going on either. But the expressions that you'll hear over and over are, "Is Gary Sudbrink there?" I mean, the guy's on the phone going, "Yeah, what do you want? Is Gary Sudbrink there? And how long will you be back from Texas?" They're really concerned about how long you're going to be in town. It's very weird. And that keeps being said over and over. Another thing that's said over and over is, "Beware of the other voice." Something like that. Like, the other voice is impersonating you. And he's like, "What other voice? What are you talking about?" And like his uncle or his father gets on the phone and is frustrated and says, "I know what you are. You're some sort of intergalactic personality. And I've had contact with you. And what the hell are you doing?" And another thing it says, "Government interference with contact." And it says, okay, it was government interference with contact. And it goes, this guy Gary goes, "Okay, government interference with contact with you guys, is that a good thing or a bad thing for me?" But, and sometimes he goes, "Oh, Gary's not here." "Of course you know he's here. You know it's me." He just gets frustrated, and that's why you get like a garbled thing. But let's just throw it on, and then that's it for me. And I'll let this kind of speak for itself. Anyway. She called up and said, "Hey, honey, get the drinks going because I'll be home in 10 minutes. And he's like, "That's cool, So he had just poured himself a drink because it was about the time for her to call. And then he poured her a drink. I mean, that's what he remembers doing, pouring her a drink. And then the next thing he remembers is she's home in the kitchen. They're both in the kitchen, and they're disoriented. And they look over at the drinks, and the drinks are all watery, and all the ice is melted. And one of they have like an eat-in kitchen with a little circular table, and they have 4 conventional kind of colonial style chairs, and they usually are all just perfectly lined up, but one was pulled out a little bit. And then here's the weird part. It's like they said exactly between those 4 chair legs exactly was a perfect circle of alcohol from this bottle, like perfect. Like he said, if you put one more drop in there, it would have hit one of the legs and gotten unsymmetrical or something. But it was like the surface tension was such, there was this perfect circle, like, what's the right word, transcribed inside the 4 points of the, and they were just, I'm sure there's something there to explore, and there was a missing time element, and the drinks were all watery. I mean, so he has like a whole bunch of weird stuff, and that's how a lot of these experiencers are. You start scratching the surface, and there's so many weird things going on, you don't know when to turn the faucet off. But this is back to the pharmacist who, had some oddball things going on, but then he had the big thing with the airport, and then somebody's calling his friends up saying it's him, and then the phone calls start that night.
I'll tell you who it is. Yeah. Do you want to speak to him?
Gary's Sudbrink there.
Yeah, who's this? Steven? Are you playing games with me or what? Huh? Steven, if you're playing games, I'm going to kick your ass.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
Huh?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Yeah, this is you, Steven, you idiot. You're pissing me off. You jerk. I'm going to get you on... Let's see what it says. Review. 1 new call out of area. Is Steven out of the area?
How long are you going to be back from Texas?
Wait, say that again?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Wait, hold on. Is Steven out of the calling area or what? What do you mean you don't know? He's in Queens.
Well, who are you talking to?
I don't know who the fuck.
Hello?
Hello?
Here's Gary's sudden break there.
Who is this? Sounds like a freaking robot.
So
Hello?
how long are you going to be back from Texas?
What was that again, sir?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Oh, be quiet, fine. Sorry, would you see that again? Hello? Being impersonated by what voice?
Hello?
Yeah. Hello?
Here's Gary's sudden break there.
Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, what is your question? I'll answer it.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
How long?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Right. When am I coming back? Is that your question? Okay, there was a break. Hold on. You want to know when I'm coming back to Texas? Oh, is that your question?
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
How long am I going to be back from Texas? That question doesn't make any sense.
By the other voice.
Okay. I'll be coming back eventually. I can't tell you when. You should know that question, the answer to the question, because you seem to know more about me than I do.
You know what they're doing there? They're brain scanning them.
It's, speaking.
It goes on and on, you know. I mean, it doesn't go on too much longer.
Yes. Can I answer any questions for you?
Are you back from Texas?
Not back yet, no.
How long are you going to be back from Texas?
Let me answer. First, you tell me, where are you calling from?
Gary Circle.
Yeah, why don't you tell me where you're calling from?
Who is this?
What do you mean, who is this? You should know who it is. It's me, Gary. Wait, let me ask you this question. Where are you calling from? Okay, I'll be back. Excuse me?
So something about looking in Orion.
I can't hear too well.
Something about Orion.
Yeah, it is a full moon out. That's true. Could you identify yourself? Identify yourself. Why are you calling me? Excuse me? I cannot hear too well.
Get on the other phone, it's better.
Hold on, let me switch phones. Okay. Okay, hold on. Now, who are you? Keep an eye in the sky, he said.
Keep an eye in the sky?
Yeah.
Ask him, can I talk to him?
Shh, shh.
I had a sighting.
Okay, hold on. Say that, repeat that again. Please repeat. Okay. Near Orion.
Holy mackerel. Tonight or guess on when?
The full moon.
They told
So, double from here.
Pete?
Tell him I like to talk to him.
Okay, repeat last word. I'm hearing static.
Tell him I like to talk to him.
He hung up.
The uncle does get on, and he's, that's when he starts ranting.
You can sit down, Tom, bunch.
He starts ranting about, I know you're intergalactic
Okay.
person,
Yeah, it's taking time for him to talk. Who is this? Stephen, this is not funny, you know.
Brian, it's not Stephen.
What do you mean, Brian?
I mean, Gary.
How do I know it's not Stephen?
It's not Stephen. Hello? I had a UFO experience in West Virginia, which you probably know. And I know that you're into an intergalactic person. Can you speak a little louder? Sir? Can you speak a little louder? Louder?
Let me speak to him, Dad. I guess I don't know what his...
All right, I'll hang up so you can talk to him. He wants to talk to you.
Okay. Hello, can I help you?
Hello.
Yes.
There's Gary somewhere.
Yes, that's me.
Yeah, there's Gary somewhere.
Yes, could you please identify yourself? Identify.
Oh, you're back from Texas.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm in Texas right now. Oh, he asked me a question. No, I'm in New York right now. You know that. Why are you asking me such a question? Yes. Stephen, if this is you, I swear to God, I'm going to be pissed. Huh? I'm trying to listen to him. Excuse me? Okay. Eventually I'll be back from Texas. Could you speak more? Please speak more. I guess it's not Stephen. I believe it because I'm getting static.
Stephen would not raise 3 times.
Let me go on this phone because I can never hear on this phone. Hold on. Okay. Okay, please speak. Hello?
Keep an eye on the sky.
Okay. Should I go out right now?
Right.
Right now?
The full moon.
Okay, see, I'm not sure where Orion is now, but we'll go outside.
It will show double from here.
It will show double from me. Repeat that again?
He does say, well, and we only have so much time, but it does say in there, government interference with contact, and that's what he says. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes, this is me. Can I speak to you? Can I ask why you're... Yes, can I ask why you're calling? Can I please ask? Yes, this is. Yes, that is me.
To be within this planet.
Say that again?
And this planet.
Leave?
It's a new expression. I forget what he says here. I can get it.
We come
I'm staying right here.
to be within this planet.
Is this a joke or what? have to think about that. I'd like to see you.
The money to be contact has the same with you.
Hey, let me tell you something. I've been listening to you, and I've had contacts with you.
Government interference? You have? Please explain what type of interference. Okay.
Visitations to be disrupted by them. Dark side of the moon.
The sun will rise from the dark side of the moon.
Okay, what branch of the government?
That kills me. What branch?
Managed to get, this happened so many times that they started to record the stuff. And they managed to get recordings and try to understand what was going on. And there's a guy, a physicist out in California by the name of Jack Sarfati, some of you might have heard of in the event. He's on the fringe of physics. He's somebody who's been in it for a long time. But his story is that back in the 50s when he was a kid, like early teens, he remembered getting one phone call from a metallic voice sounding, saying that they were from some planet or something like that, and they were going to appear outside a building. And he said he and his friends really ran outside and looked. I can't remember whether they saw anything or not, but he remembered one phone call. He says years later when he talked to his mother about this to see if she remembered what he remembered, she remembered that there were a series of phone calls that had happened to him back in '53, I think it was, he said. And one of the messages that he had apparently got was that in 20 years he would link up with other people or something like that. So he, of course, has long forgotten about the messages. In 1972 or 73, sure enough, by this time he's got a PhD in physics at Cornell and so on, and he actually meets a whole bunch of people who are plugged into the remote viewing stuff that I mentioned earlier. It was just beginning at SRI. So, you know, there's an awful lot of connections of stuff going on here.
Oh, I forgot to say, 10 seconds, the Heflin case, I didn't give you the update on it, but that was an update. Was it 95? You know, here's this guy, you know, from 64 or so, or 65, he hasn't had possession of his photographs, and all this time passes, and then his phone rings one day, and a woman's voice, in this case, a woman in black, says, "Have you checked your mailbox lately?" And he was like, "What?" And then the person hangs up. He goes and checks the mailbox. There's nothing in the mailbox. He goes back in. What the heck was that? Phone rings again. "Have you checked your mailbox lately?" And he goes out to his mailbox, and there's the photographs in you know, Manila. This is like, you know, 30 years later, just without explanation. So I don't think it's that creepy. I think it's just some government office finally said, "What are these? Let's return them to the guy," you know. But